Tell me about your first interview with Oasis.
Well, the first interview with the band proper. So let's discount getting pissed with Marcus, Guigsy and Bonehead it was a Paramount Hotel in Manhattan. Marcus called me up shortly after that interview, and I knew he was going to call me up. This is a documented occasion. In Newcastle, when the band were performing, some fan managed to get onto the stage, punched Noel in the face. And I knew, I saw this across, as you can imagine, across all of the UK media. I thought, my phone's going to ring. And sure enough, 2 days later, the phone rang. It's Marcus. He's like, Robert, we absolutely need to take security on board. It's got to happen now. And can you come down and meet the band? So I went across to the Astoria Theatre where they were performing. And that was the interview, basically. I watched them play, did my job. They then saw the difference between having me on the road with them and not having had me prior. I had to be interviewed by band and crew. The band interview was as straightforward as, how do I fit? Do we feel comfortable in this person's company? And then to a degree, what's your pedigree? And within that, I'd worked with Rotten and Public Image Limited, and Rotten is still is an icon to both Noel and to Liam, and probably to Marcus as well, to most people, if truth be told. And in reality, I simply did a decent job for them, and they had a different experience of that day and that evening than they had up to that point without somebody running shotgun, on their behalf.
Was it quite exciting to be in with the band?
Well, listen, at that point, I'd been in the industry for a good few years, and so I was very, very mindful of what was happening. And I was very mindful of the great privilege to be at the beginning of something. But nothing was written in the stars, and nothing actually ever is written in the stars. What I think is particularly interesting, what I've always thought was particularly interesting looking back, is if you look at the transcripts of interviews with Liam and Noel particularly. I mean, you can find interviews with Bonehead and Guigsy, but they're few and far between. And it became very clear very quickly that the media were really only interested in either Liam or Noel. If there were any interview requests that came in, and of course there were many interview requests that came in, I want to speak to Liam, I want to speak to Noel. And that's kind of the way it shook out in the end. But if you look at the transcripts of any of those 94 interviews, even 93, and that kind of messianic, this is a biblical prophecy, we will be the greatest band in the world. The reality behind the scenes is that they really weren't as confident as the words would suggest. And a really good example of that is, again, the first arena show that we did was at Sheffield. And at that point, we'd been playing clubs, theatres. Probably the biggest venue we played was 1,800, maybe 2,000 capacity. Sheffield Arena is 11,000 plus. And Liam, Marcus, Simon Moran, who is the head guy at SJM Promotions, who handled the band then, handles the band now. He said, let's take a look at the venue. So I'd been there before with other bands, but Liam had never been in there. And as we stepped up onto the stage and looked out, this it's huge. And by comparison with where we've been playing, it just looks so, this is what and Liam lost his shit. He was screaming at Simon Moran. What the are you thinking? There's no way that we will sell half enough tickets to fill this venue. And Simon Moran just looked at me and said, it's done. Hour and a half. And that was probably the first evidence that actually they were going to back up all of those words. But Liam's reaction to that space was not, of course.
Yeah.
It was, what are you thinking? And I for me, it's like, look again, if anyone wants to take the time and look back at what they were saying, the reality behind the scenes was, that confidence was not there. Every day was a surprise. And that was one of the great joys of it, actually. I'm a fan. of Oasis, certainly, but of rock and roll generally. And so as I realized that this was something really special, not just because the music was great and they were putting in some just extraordinary performances in small venues, but then you saw the world wake up to it, and you saw these little postcards of evidence that it was happening. For me, the acid test was we were supporting REM, and we were nailed on for 4 shows. One of those shows was at Slane Castle, just outside Dublin. Now, that has a capacity of about 80,000 people, and REM had sold it. We were bottom of the bill, okay? So we helicoptered into Slane to get there early. And I guess we arrived at about 11 o'clock in the morning, and I think we were on stage, I don't know, 2, 3, maybe even 4 o'clock. But we were there way before. Received wisdom at one of these events is that audience is there to see REM. And there is a crossover, definitely. There's an indie crossover between REM and Oasis, without a shadow of a doubt. But it's not that significant, I don't think. As we helicoptered in at 11 o'clock and I looked out the side windows, there were probably 50,000 people there already at 11 o'clock in the morning. And they were there to see Oasis. And that was when, for me, the penny dropped, you know. And then the intensity of the performance. I had to take the band off stage 4, possibly 5 times, because the arena security at Slane Castle just hadn't got their head around what they were going to face. And so they'd coordinated their staff on a kind of shift rotation basis to save a few quid, right? Instead of starting somebody at 10, we start them at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's when we're going to need them. And then we bring the sort of shock troops in for REM when 80,000 people are out there, blah, blah, blah. So when Oasis went on, 4 times, certainly maybe 5 times, they had to be taken off stage. And they had to be taken off stage because the weight, the crush of expectation that was coming, you know, from the back and forwards was just too intense. And the only way to kind of alleviate that was to remove the source of everybody's kind of infatuation, passion.
Is that you then? Are you stood there going, like watching and going,
right, yeah, well, and it's in it. So the job of band security, if you're running the security operation for a band, there are 2 truths. One of them is, there's a Johnny Cash quote, isn't there? A kicking and a gouging in the mud and the blood and the beer, right? It's Boy Named Sue. So if I am kicking and gouging in the mud and the blood and the beer, then I fucked up severely at some point through the course of the day, because that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. My job is to coordinate the security teams that I will find either at a venue, whether it's a theatre or a club or Slane Castle, and speak to the head of security and make it clear what my requirements are for the band. When you're last on the bill, they're really not terribly interested in what you're bringing to the party. They're waiting for the security brief with REM's guy, you know? So you tell them, you know, what they should expect, and it flies over their head. And it really just boils down to, my approach was always, listen, this is not my venue. You guys know it. I don't. Here's what I'd like to happen. Walk me through, show me how you're going to keep my band safe. And my only real concern is that they do not ever have to spend quality time with the audience unless they want to.
Yeah.
Newcastle being a great example of Noel spending quality time with somebody he didn't really want to and getting punched in the face for it. And they just, and at Slane Castle, they weren't listening. So I've got a team of people that are running the pit, that I can't even see, that are running the doors, that are doing searches, etc. And my role is that I'm on stage with the band and I'm looking to see if there's anything that might go south, and I might feed that information into the security team in the pit, or in the unlikely event, and hugely unlikely event at a venue like Slane Castle that somebody gets on stage, I will deal with that, you know. But at Slane, it was, and I'm calling the show. And frankly, normally that means nothing. That means you stand there, Clubs are different. Clubs, sometimes people do get on the stage and that has to be addressed. But at a venue like Slane Castle, and you've been to shows, 80,000 people, you've seen firstly, the distance between the audience and the artist. And then secondly, it's a bit like the bloody Berlin Wall, isn't it?
Yeah, there is.
Do you know what I mean? To get from the front,
exactly.
To get from the front of the audience over this and with people pushing behind you, then up that, surreptitiously, it's not going to happen.
The North-South Korea border.
It's one of those.
Empty space.
It really is.
Dead space.
No machine guns, to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah.
But then I've never done shows I have done shows in Russia with Mark Armand.
Bloody
there
hell.
were no machine guns.
So that was a point when you went, bloody hell, this is big.